Okay, so we're going to get started. Hello, I am David Lee, and I'm the Marketing Director for MSS Business Transformation. Today we have two of our own as guests, Saliya Witharana, Managing Director of our Advisory Services Group, and John Weiser, one of our illustrious consulting managers. Both these fellows are experts in digital transformation, which follows since our topic today is what makes digital transformation risky? Why does it fail so often? And how can companies increase their probability of achieving their goals through digital transformation? So let's jump right in. Guys, when I talk to people, read articles, attend conferences on the matter of digital transformation, it becomes clear that there's a wide variety of understanding and definitions for it. How do we define it? How do we present it to our clients? Sally, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so digital transformation is, as you said, used pretty widely. How we look at it is taking when an organization takes any digital technology and they want to use it for business growth or business innovation, coupled with a change in operating model. Okay, so this would be, in the broadest context, a digital transformation. How MSS looks at it, we also want to look at the whole organization, the impact to the organization when you go through a digital transformation. So it's not just the technology side, it's the people side as well. And I think this is an area that a lot of companies tend to ignore or not focus on at the beginning.
So it's connected to your business strategy. It's impacting your entire organization. It's focused not just on technology and people. Anything to add to that, John?
No, I think what Saliya said, I think that making sure that you're aware of that up front as you're getting into the process of going through a digital transformation, the more you could recognize that it impacts the entire organization. It's not just an IT initiative, the better.
Just to add a little bit comment to that, so how it impacts the organization is all digital transformations end up having a new operating model because you're using new technologies, you're using new ways customer interfaces are different, so you end up with a new operating model. That's where you run into some issues.
It's something that changes the company forever, essentially.
Yep.
Okay. Well, one thing I know is from Gartner and others that pointed out there's stats out there galore on it, but the digital transformation often fails to meet objectives. I think the number is 70 to 80% of the time, depending on the source. What are the warning signs? What are the reasons that people aren't on the right track? Some of the reasons that they fail.
So I think for a digital transformation to be successful, first I think organizations need to understand their primary objective instead of just doing a digital transformation for the sake of doing a digital transformation. One is not seeing your strategy, your IT strategy, as a competitive advantage. And how you do that is you got to make sure your IT strategy is enabling your business strategy. If you miss that, then you have two different organizations trying to accomplish two different objectives. You may not understand all the emerging technologies that's available, the digital technologies, and how do these digital technologies interact with each other. For example, how does IoT, the Internet of Things, what comes out of it, the data, how do you take it from the edge, move it, and use that? There's a lot of information that you need to understand. Another one that we have identified and that's out there is the skill set. Just from a leadership point of view to understanding all the skills that are needed to blend strategy, business strategy, IT strategy, how do you take it together, put it together, and your objective is companies' long-term growth. How do you meet that? How does IT enable that?
So being around you guys and listening to it, it's representing a change in what the people who are in charge of the IT strategy and what they do and what they're expected to do in their jobs today. So if I'm out there and I'm looking for somebody who's going to lead me through a digital transformation, what kind of skill set am I looking for? What kind of people am I looking for?
So, very interesting question. So today, if you look at an organization, the way it's set up, you have the business leaders and you have the IT leaders, right? What's happening is these two groups are blending now. You cannot expect the IT organization to come up with a digital transformation strategy without talking to the business guys. You cannot expect the business guys to go enable a business strategy with the leading edge IT technology without working with the IT guys. So from a role standpoint, both the roles are changing. The business leaders now have to understand how technology, especially digital technology, impacts them, their business, how they can use it. From an IT standpoint, these guys are not working in a silo. Now they have to reach out to the business guys and then essentially say, how can we help you? Here's what we have. How can we use, out of this whole portfolio of available technologies, which ones are the highest impact to your, the business guys, right?
Right.
So John.
No, yeah, and I think that Saliya brings up a good point there. And one of the important things he said was that the IT folks don't necessarily have to know everything from the organization's perspective. And similarly, the organization has to focus on how technology impacts them rather than being aware of every single thing out there in the technological landscape. But that dynamic, that relationship is going to be one of the paradigm shifts that I think that a lot of organizations still have to go through, where the business partners with IT rather than having independent strategies, or we have business objectives and independently we have IT. It's now so intermingled, and the rate of change that's going through that we're seeing right now, it has to be a very, very close partnership, and has to be well established that change is constant. How are the business folks identifying opportunities to better leverage IT, and how is IT continually focusing on how can they better serve the business objectives, the business strategy?
Do you mean the business guys and the tech guys are going to have to be able to talk to each other?
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
I was afraid of this.
So that's a good point, right? So you asked the question, how do you know, it may not work, and, are there any signs, right? From a skill set standpoint, it's not easy to go enable skills. So it'll take time. But if you are not talking to each other, it's not going to work. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
So the skills, they can absorb the skills as they go through. So learning from mistakes or learning from what other organizations did, they can adapt to some of these skill sets or methodologies to enable the technology. But that's what you have to look for. If you know that, again, if they're not talking to each other, it's a recipe for failure.
One of the other points that you've mentioned, Sally, I've heard you mention, is that in terms of knowing whether your strategy is in the right direction or not, is whether your organization understands the full costs associated with digital transformation. Now, that seems like a pretty obvious statement, but when you dig down deeper, and I know you guys have been in situations where people didn't understand the full costs, what are some of the things that people miss? What are some of the possible ways that if I'm sitting out there and I'm engaging in this, that I need to take account of?
So, good question. Typically, what we have seen in organizations that have got engaged in a digital transformation, they look at the big buckets of costs that. So let me take a step back, right? I mean, the first step you do is in a digital transformation, you have to have a business case, right? So, and a key component of the business case is how much is this thing going to cost? So what you do is you look at tangible costs. So if you look at tangible costs, you would see one around a solution. What digital technology solution are you going to be needing, right? So that's a very tangible cost, because you're going to have someone outside who's going to come in and say, this is how much this thing is going to cost. It could be a license, technology license that you lease that's from a cloud-based solution, or it could be a custom application. Whatever it is, it is a cost that you can put numbers around. So now the second component is, okay, you have that. You're going to need someone to come and enable it, so integrate it into your existing infrastructure, right? So that's another tangible cost. That's where everyone stops doing the cost modeling, because the next component is a very difficult intangible cost, and that is the cost that your organization has to put into to make this whole thing successful. So what are those costs? Organizational change management, because you are going to end up with some operating model changes, you're going to have some behavior changes. These are costs that typically organizations don't know how to go compute. So all the work that the organization has to do has a cost involved. And most companies don't know how to go cost that component out separately. So they will either say, yes, we can absorb it to our existing workforce, which is a disaster because people have jobs to do. And even if they have the time, there's a skill set issue. Have you done this before? So it's a bandwidth and a skill set issue, and costing that out, which is essentially sort of an intangible cost, and missing that is, I think, the biggest issue I've seen organizations that we've been called into.
Yeah, and I think what Saliya mentioned was, I think the big thing for a lot of the organizations, they might not be experts in these things, but I think the big thing for them is to recognize that these costs exist. And so I think a good example of one is an organization that we recently went into. It's actually one of our local state agencies. And they had not gone through a digital transformation of any extent in the past 30 years, roughly. They had been on an AS400, those big refrigerator-looking things, and that's how they operated their entire back office. So everything in terms of their licensing, their any billing, any investigations, all of this operated in this 30-year-old system. And so when they went to a new system, instead of jumping right in and saying, "Hey, we've got this 30-year-old system, we immediately need to jump ship into something new," they took a step back and said, "Let's build out our strategy first. Let's build it. Let's do an assessment, really, a fairly quick assessment, to make sure that we understand where we're going in the future state. Make sure that our organization is fully prepared." Again, these are people that have not gone through this significant of a change in 30 years, so those lifts are incredibly heavy for an organization, as well as making sure that they had the right people to voice their requirements, the true business requirements of what would be needed, not just in the current state to catch up with where they are, but in the future state. And so going into that organization, this was a perfect situation where they knew that a significant change was coming their way. They knew that there would be an immense lift on the organization itself, but they also recognized that we might not be necessarily experts to do this, but it does need to occur. So it was an ideal situation for us to go into.
And there's a point underlying that, which is the number of times that you're going to go through this amount of change in your career if you're a manager is accelerating. It used to be that might happen maybe once or twice in a career, but that's starting to accelerate, where you're going to have the big change, maybe once or twice, but now you're going to have to be continually adapting and making additional change. So coming along those lines and say, taking into account all the complexities that we're talking about, how do I, as a leader, know my organization's ready for this kind of endeavor?
So I just actually, this is another kind of a storytelling from John perspective, but we just
John
actually,
is our storyteller.
I'm the resident storyteller apparently, but we just actually came out of a project where they had been undergoing a digital transformation. This one took the flavor of installing a new e-procurement system to attach onto their ERP system. And this was an organization that was incredibly decentralized. It was spread out across 16 different states with their own local leadership, a part of each of them. And those challenges are very, very, it could be insurmountable for a lot of organizations. But after we wrapped up this project, I was very, very confident that they would be able to successfully sustain this change. And the reason is they had the right mindset for it. They have a standard structure in place of every time they have a new system, or every time for their existing systems, they constantly have what they call a backlog of features, where they are constantly looking for ways to improve their existing systems, whether or not they have necessarily a budget for it or a time frame for it, but they're constantly looking to analyze how can they do this better, how can they better leverage technology to enable their business strategy. More so than that, they also have an existing structure in place that regularly discusses with each other across the entire organization to regularly provide that feedback and that platform to do so. So there's ways to do it, even if you're spread across 16 different states, 16 different countries, or if you're all sitting in the same location. There's no real excuse to not have that mindset of how can we make our business operations better, and how do we leverage technology in order to do so.
So David, just going back to your question on how do you know if you're not ready, right? If you start asking questions, and one of the questions I would ask is, have you considered the people component of all this transformation? You got the right technology, you got everything ready, the business guys are aligned, the strategy is aligned, IT strategy is aligned. It's a very simple question, are your people going to be ready? And if they don't have a good answer and a good plan, guaranteed failure. Because you are going to end up with a new operating model. you're going to end up with maybe upskilling some of the workers that you have. So you must understand the impact to the organization. You must understand the impact to the people, and you must have a very solid plan how to adopt this new technology. So you also made a good point, and this is not a digital transformation is not an event, right?
Yeah.
It is a journey, because it
I can tell you the number of times I've listened to people and say, when they say, "Oh, when this is just all over, everything's going to be great again."
No, it's it's a journey, and the people part of that journey is a crucial part, because they're the ones who are going to make this whole digital transformation successful for you.
So ideally, when somebody's thinking of this, they'll call us up, say, "We're just getting started. We're starting to think about this. We're just putting our strategy together. We'd really like your advice on how to make this digital transformation work." Clearly, that's never how it actually happens. Usually, it's somewhere down the line they've realized something's gone wrong. They call you guys in. You get on the ground and you say, "Okay, how do you start? How do you help them if they already know they're going down the wrong path?"
So you're right. Unfortunately, that's a cleanup job, right?
Yeah.
And we have a few of those, and it's not easy, simply because there is no given methodology you can walk in and say, because each unique situation is different. They could have missed on any one of these big components we were talking about, right? And most of the time, it's not costing the responsibility of internal organization. How do you enable this? So what we have to do is go and understand everything, and that's where it becomes very expensive, because a lot of times people say, "Listen, we started on this journey, and it ended up costing us 3 times." That's why. Because you didn't do the right costing at the beginning, you didn't understand, so you get into this thing, and now you're too far down. You've already paid a lot of money, so now you have to pay a lot more to get out of it and take this.
But it's better to stop it now than continue to down this path.
Right.
Absolutely, and I think John probably has a couple of good examples of where we have
stories.
called in, and we so sometimes we have to. We always have a pause button and say, let's pause this. And our recommendations can be quite different from going from you've gone on the wrong path, and you have to stop and start all over again. Or maybe we can salvage this thing, right, and make it work. So John has some examples.
Yeah,
I think.
and to your point, catch it early. Don't wait till your car's broken down on the side of the road. Make sure there's oil in it as you're going along during the journey, right? And so, one of the perfect examples aligned with this was an organization was going through the process of implementing a new work processing and licensing system in place. They were closing in on $1 million into the project when they realized that something might be wrong, and that's when they called us in. And the first recommendation was, let's put the pause button on this, because if you're smelling smoke, let's dig into this. As Saliya mentioned, there's not necessarily a quick fix. You have to go in and do a kind of a deep dive analysis of what's going on. And what we found in this case was, as we mentioned before, they knew that they needed a system, and instead of developing the strong foundation, the strong groundwork to build this digital transformation from, they said, we need this conceptually, let's conceptually go after one of the best ones in the market, and off they went. And what we found was they had never gone through the process or the exercise of saying, what do we want this to achieve? And so during our time out, if you will, that quick assessment while the project was put on pause, was we identified somewhere along the lines of 10 core principles that they were going after. If the project had magically gone live perfectly as designed the next day, they would accomplish a grand total of one of those things that they were actually looking for the system to do. And so you look at it and you say, this could have been prevented early on. This could have been caught early on by proper planning, by at least recognizing that it was going in the wrong direction as early as possible. But at that point, you're as Saliya mentioned, at some point, sometimes you're too far gone, and you might have to end up restarting the project. Now, this story of mine that does have a happy ending to it. They were able to reset the project, rescope it based off of, again, their true business objectives, aligned with not only what we were hearing from management, but going to the process owners themselves and say, what do we need in a future state, not just replicating the current state, but a future state that we want to get to, and agree that we're going in that right direction. They were able to implement the newly selected system effectively. Folks have been able to use it for the past 6 months now, and it's confidently moved them in the right direction of where are they going to be for the next few years. And again, back to our point of constantly having that, I think the Intel phrase is only the paranoid survive, so having that healthy head on a swivel mentality of how can we constantly continue to get better from this.
So John made a very good point I want to just bring up. So he said this engagement we went to, we looked at 10 principles, I think, what you said. So I want to make sure that people understand that those are the business objectives,
Yes.
and that should be very clearly listed in your business case.
Mm-hmm.
So this should be like any other big engagement you get into, a big investment, you've got to have business outcomes clearly listed so that when you're done, you can go back and say, yes, we achieved them. Right, and that's one of the key areas we emphasize when we look at business cases. Essentially ask a very simple question: how do you know what success looks like after all this, right? And if you cannot explain that back to me, then you go back to one of your points. You have a bad system, right? I mean, you're just going on a journey that you don't know where it's
Journey
taking
with
you.
no destination.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
West of Westeros.
West of
All right, guys. I had to throw that in. We're getting to the point right now where we want to start taking questions. We can take questions either from callers or we can get through the chat function. I'll go out there. Are there any questions out there? Okay, so we're getting one in from chat. How do you know, okay, let me look at this. How do you know that you are taking a best-in-class approach? So I know you actually have a pretty strong opinion about the term
Yeah,
best-in-class.
so yes, I do. The thing about best in class is you have to be a little bit careful about that. It depends on how mature you are in an organization. Of course, best in class, which is you go benchmark your industry and see how your competitors are performing at the highest level. Typically, that's best in class. Again, going back to your business objectives, if you don't need best in class, but you can still meet your business objectives and your key strategy, go for that, right? Because that means you're so far behind, you don't need to leapfrog 10 stages to get to best in class. Just take your time, because your organization has to be ready as well. It's a good goal, but it should not be the single goal.
Best in class is best in class for you,
Right.
essentially, in that sense.
Yeah.
Best in class for yes, but there is a structured methodology in terms of best in class methodology, best in class approach to things. I would make the argument that there is one of those in finding what's right for you, going through the structured process of, okay, let's develop a strong foundation to build off of. Your end result might not be best in class in your industry, but your approach should be very, very structured, very, very pragmatic in making sure that you are successful.
And that brings something up too. That's another question, which is digital transformation only for large companies? And I understand this question because it sounds like something that's for big companies, big ventures, and all that. But this methodology you're talking about, does it scale? Does scale matter in terms of how you approach it?
So let me answer that question in two ways. One is digital transformations limited to big companies? The answer is no. The world is changing, right? I mean, just how consumers buy things, the availability of a lot of data, advanced analytics. So I think any company, small or large, you've got to take advantage of these technologies. So no, it's not just limited. But then going back to a question about scaling, yes, the methodology, the approach is the same, but scale is different, and timing is different, and costs are different.
Mm-hmm.
But the outcome should, again, be clearly listed and should be aligned with what your business strategy is.
Doesn't look like we have any other questions. We're also running out of time. So I'm going to tease the fact that we have talked about doing a future podcast webinar on sustainability, which was one of the topics we brought up here, but can be a full 30-minute, hour, 3-day topic. So we're going to tease that for the future. I want to thank Saliya Witharana, Director of MSS Business Transformation Advisory Services, and John Weiser, our Consulting Manager at MSS. For those of you who are listening, you can learn more about MSS by visiting our website at mssbta.com or follow us on LinkedIn. MSS is a consulting firm located in Phoenix, Arizona that facilitates and assists in the business and digital transformation of our clients' operations. Thank you for listening and have a good day.